So Pauline Hansen has, I think, as she does most months, at least in my opinion, has made a fool of herself by trying to introduce a bill to ban the burqa. And then when that bill was basically blocked by the entirety of the Senate, a refusal to even vote on the matter, she then wore a burqa into the Senate as some sort of symbolic protest about the fact that she wasn't allowed to introduce the bill. And I think a lot of people are going to ask, what the hell is she doing? And the honest answer to that question is, she is making a shitstorm over nothing to engage in a culture war issue to try and capitalize on her current polling success. But if you ask me, this is going to do the exact opposite of what she thinks it's going to do for her and her party. Here's the thing, we don't really need to get into Pauline's character or her background. We know what she is, and we know that she's even done this burqa bit before, wearing it in the Senate chamber. And it's such a... Look, normally I delve into like the moment-to-moment Senate like procedure of what is actually going on and like where this ended up, but I think it's important to point out sort of the insanity of what Pauline is doing and how ultimately meaningless this whole thing is. Pauline Hansen and a lot of very right-wing people like her are really fighting ghosts. They are jumping at shadows, obsessing over nothing. There is this inherent fear that they have that the presence of Islam in Australia is something that will destroy it, that it's something that's at cultural odds with Australia as a whole. And it's very interesting is that people that tend to be very far right suddenly find themselves being incredibly feminist when it comes to issues relating to Islam. For example, it's like, oh, suddenly the moment that we're discussing like facial coverings or like the hijab or potentially the burqa, then suddenly these far right people are like, this is about women's rights to do what they want. When harping on about feminism is something that they would normally, in any other circumstance, considered woke and meaningless. But when it comes to its weaponization to attack people of the Muslim faith, then they don't have a problem with it. And here's how I know Pauline is grandstanding over nothing. Do you know how many women wear the burqa in Australia? According to the ABC, it's less than 300. In a nation of 27 million people, a few hundred, I don't even know if that's fair to say, because like 200 and something women made the decision to wear burqas. And it's very clear that it is not catching on. But the idea of it is so scary to some elements of the Australian right that it not only needs to be taken seriously, it needs to be outright banned in this country. Here's a way that I like to look at it. The burqa is only worn by someone between 200 and 300 women in all of Australia. To give you a sense of how much of a non-issue this is, Pauline Hansen, when she is wearing the burqa, as she has in the Senate on more than one occasion, when she is wearing the burqa, she is representing 0.3 to 0.5% of all the women in Australia that are wearing burqas. If all 4 One Nation senators wore burqas into the chamber, they would represent more than 1% of the totality of people in Australia wearing burqas. Because look, in good faith, you can have a conversation about whether or not religious coverings like the burqa are appropriate in a secular society. If we want people in this country being taught from childhood that they need to wear complete facial coverings. There is a debate to be had there. But I think it's very clear that Pauline puts that at the forefront purely for the sake of political gain rather than a good faith argument for the sake of women. I say that because she's kind of doing the rounds in the media world at the moment. And I think part of this is her testing the waters of if that potential high of 18% that One Nation is currently reaching in polling actually is something that she can really build upon, and seeing what stunts that she can put in place to see like how much that can go up or that can go down. Really just sort of, you know what, let's just see what we can do with this high polling, see if we can push it even further. Let's get ourselves into the media. because there was another stunt this week. This was the week where she had a big dinner, very, very, very well publicized dinner with Barnaby Joyce, who she is openly courting to join One Nation, and according to all the rumors I did a video on, lead the One Nation Senate ticket in New South Wales in 2028. But anyway, back to Pauline Hansen's crusade against the burqa. I think the Senate acted well in how it responded to her. Not only was she censured by the Senate, but on top of that, she was given a 7-day suspension from the chamber. And that is sitting days, not as in she can return to the Senate a week from now, but actual sitting days of Parliament. And that is quite important because there aren't that many days left. She's going to be banned for essentially the rest of the sitting of Parliament this year, and then several days at the start of next year. In a certain way, I think Pauline got what she wanted. She got to be the centre of attention, and she gets to rail against the establishment, as it were. She gets to say that, look, they have shut me down for trying to take a stance against religious extremism, as she believes it to be when it comes to wearing the burqa, and she gets to say that it's this combined effort from the parties to censure me and to keep me out of the chamber. So she's going to have her media circus, and this is the moment where she's going to see if that makes her polling even better or possibly worse. And I'm actually kind of inclined to agree that this might backfire a bit for her. One Nation has, of course, always been an extreme option, but part of what she has going for her at the moment is that the Liberal Party is so out of sorts, such a profound mess of a political organisation at the moment, that people are considering other options. Like some people probably just thinking, you know what, what's another option on the right? Maybe One Nation, let's consider that. But I think disaffected Liberal voters are going to be less inclined to support One Nation more, the more they are reminded of how performative and really on the extreme it is as a political party. Even Matt Canavan, the most right-wing member of the coalition, in my opinion, had very, very harsh words for Pauline and her decision to put this stunt together. And I think it may have been overplaying the hand in saying, like, look, I'm going to go out there and do something extreme to get attention on myself, but I don't think she's understood that her current rise in success is because people are viewing her as an alternative to liberal chaos. But those disaffected Liberal voters are more likely than not, at least in my opinion, to potentially be scared off by this than thinking, oh yeah, look, there's One Nation proving that it's a viable alternative. Look, some people in the comments are going to say that that is wishful thinking, but I think a big part of why the Liberal Party is bleeding to death at the moment in terms of its support is because it's kind of a loose collective of conservative-minded people who really have no coherent policy tying them together. The coalition is being held together at the seams, and people are really looking for any alternative. And I think it's important for people to remember that some of those alternatives, like One Nation, really are just performative, insane parties that don't actually have any ability to properly form government or really put policy in place. If you are a disaffected Liberal voter and your main concern was cost of living, but you weren't considering voting Labor, but you liked what Pauline had to say about the idea of, like, trying to keep jobs in Australia or trying to prevent, like, foreign investment in the country, it's like, okay, yeah, I can maybe see some logic there, I understand it, but then you were abruptly reminded, oh wait, there she is in the Senate wearing a burqa, attacking a religious minority for no reason other than to satisfy the most fanatical parts of her base, which, if we're being honest, is probably all of it. Anyway, those are some quick thoughts on Pauline Hansen's latest stunt. And I'm sorry if this wasn't as, like, analytical or as, like, breaking down and looking at as I would in, like, other situations, but, like, Pauline is so much of just, like, a one-note character in Australian politics that there are just points where it's like, you got to point out how pathetic and unimpressive what she's doing actually is. So I hope you guys are okay with me calling out the nonsensical, discriminatory insanity, as I see it, in One Nation at the moment. And let's be honest, throughout all of its existence, but particularly in these latest arcing up spats over literally nothing. I also want to say on top of that, thank you to everyone that took place in the poll to potentially look at non-political topics I could look at just for the sake of fun. I think it's upwards of 3,000 at this point. So to the nearly 10% of you that are my subscribers that voted in that, thank you for doing so. It means a lot when I want to consider looking at maybe non-political topics, not as like a shift to what this channel will be, but rather just like, you know what, it's a Sunday, there's not much happening in politics, but I still want to rant about something. And I also realized that that's kind of vague, the two options there. Crocodile law is insane, and the Bible is way weirder than you think. At the moment, I'm currently looking at a bunch of like minor secondary interests aside from Australian politics. At the moment, I'm reading Ancient Christianites, the first 500 years of Christianity by Paula Fredrickson, which is kind of a cultural study and like a historical look at how weird Christianity was in how it got started. This weird breakaway sect of Judaism suddenly shifting and taking over the world. It's not a religious analysis, it is a historical one of how such a unique religion took over the world, and looking at that from a historical perspective, and on top of that also the formulation of what would become the Bible. So I thought that was fascinating. And then secondly, looking at crocodile law, I think that part of a joke of Australian politics is if you don't want to spend time on something, you kind of make reference to Bob Catter and how he approached gay marriage, if you guys remember that one. But I went down a rabbit hole not too long ago because it kind of freaks me out that we live in a country where the largest reptiles on the planet just live in the water practically everywhere once you get to a certain point in northern Queensland. And I was just reading up on that and I thought, these are the most insane actual creatures. And then I read up on like their evolutionary history and I realized that is insane. We are talking about creatures that have existed since like the Permian-Triassic extinction event in some form or another and have just endured this entire time. So that would probably be just a broad look at how these creatures have survived for so long, the forms they've taken, and how they are beyond fascinating. So anyway, thank you for voting that, guys. If you did, you still can. I'm going to keep that open for a bit longer until I have a quiet day when we don't have stunts like what we've seen in Parliament recently, and I don't have something to cover immediately when it comes to Ozpol. But thank you guys for taking part in that. Thank you for watching this, and I will see you guys next time.